There are sounds upon holy Terra that no mortal should ever hear. Beneath the thunder of orbital docks, beneath the endless hymns that rise from the basilica of the Emperor's light, there is a deeper hum, constant, patient, and eternal. It runs through the bones of the world, a vibration older than memory, the pulse of the golden throne itself. They say that if you stand long enough in the dust-clogged tunnels beneath the Sanctum Imperialis, you can feel it inside your chest, like a second heartbeat that does not belong to you. Some claim it is the Emperor's breath, the soft exhalation of divinity sustaining mankind. Others whisper it is the echo of his suffering, the machine's lament as it devours souls to keep a corpse god alive. The tunnels that cradle that sound stretch for leagues below the palace, a labyrinth carved before even the first stones of the imperial city were laid. Custodians move through those ancient arteries like golden ghosts, their armor dimmed and voxes muted. They do not speak. They do not pray. They simply listen. For in the quiet of that dark, even the most faithful can feel the weight of history pressing against the metal walls, an awareness that they are not alone. Somewhere down here, beyond the reach of the Astronomican's glow, something remembers. It began, as most damnations do, with a whisper no one wanted to hear. Servitors stationed in the lower vaults began to malfunction, their binary prayers turning to static, their optic lenses flickering with strange afterimages. Tech adepts dismissed it as data corruption from the throne's power fluctuations, and when the malfunction spread, they called it coincidence. But those who served in the darkness knew better. They saw shadows move against the flow of the machine light. They heard the hiss of something breathing through the pipes. Not air, but thought, sliding like oil through the conduits. The machines had begun to dream. The first to vanish was a Scitarius Alpha, named Varnak 7. His patrol logs ended mid-sentence, the Vox recording a single, distorted phrase before cutting off. The wall is listening. His replacement, a newly sanctified unit, refused to descend alone. They said they could feel the metal vibrating underfoot, pulsing with words in a language older than binary. The mechanicus priests assured them no such thing was possible. The circuits were stable, the systems pure. Yet when they opened the maintenance channels, the air was warm, as if the throne itself had drawn a living breath. Days became cycles. Fear turned to ritual. Custodians ordered silent vigils to watch the tunnels, and mechanicus acolytes began etching protective litanies on the steel itself. But faith is not a shield when the unknown begins to answer. One by one, the watchers began to report faint voices through their vox links. Sometimes a whisper of their own name, sometimes the low chanting of prayers that had not been spoken on Terra for millennia. Those who listened too long were found later, kneeling before the throne's power cables, their visors dark, their lips moving in perfect unison with the hum that filled the stone. They were alive but hollow, their minds replaced by the rhythm of the machine. The custodians sealed the lower corridors then, their decree absolute. No servitor, no adept, no human was to enter the lower sanctum without sanction from the Captain General himself. Yet even divine law cannot silence curiosity. In the forgotten data crypts of the administratum, rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the throne's machine spirit had become sentient, weaving new code into its conduits. Others whispered of something worse, a resonance, a second intelligence forming beneath the Emperor's presence, learning to speak in the silence of his dreams. There was one among the custodians who dared to believe it. His name was Aletheon, a veteran of the unnumbered watch. For 3 centuries he had guarded the throne's perimeter, his devotion absolute. But when he heard the static cry of the missing Scitarius replayed through the vault recorders, he heard something others ignored, a second voice layered beneath, soft and deliberate. He spent nights comparing frequencies, tracing the hum across kilometers of sacred conduit until he found a pattern. The rhythm was too precise to be random. It pulsed like a code. It was calling from beneath the throne, from a depth that did not exist on any map. When Aletheon descended into the forbidden vaults, he did not take companions. The air was thick with machine dust and incense, and every footstep echoed like a confession. The deeper he went, the louder the hum became, until it was no longer sound but sensation. A trembling that entered his bones and filled his mind with half-seen images. A figure bound in light, a storm of gold bleeding into darkness, and the faint impression of eyes that saw him through every wall. The custodian felt fear for the first time since his creation. He whispered a prayer to the emperor, and the hum answered. It was not words, not truly. It was memory pressed against his mind, the weight of something vast and unseen, aware of his presence. He felt the throne's power surge, the lights flicker, and the ground beneath him trembled like the beating of a colossal heart. Then, in a voice that seemed to rise from within his own skull, he heard it. "You do not belong here." The hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse than sound. It was absolute, suffocating, endless. Aletheon tried to move, but the world itself seemed to hold him still. Then, faint and distant, came the sound of weeping, not human, not machine, but something between. When he returned to the surface, his armor was scarred and his vox grill fused shut. His report was sealed by the Captain General, classified as apocrypha. Yet those who saw him said his eyes glowed faintly with light that was not reflection, a steady, golden burn like the echo of the throne made flesh. In the years that followed, the hum returned, quieter but more insistent. Servitors resumed their prayers. The mechanicus restored the conduits. But in the silence between shifts, those who worked the lower levels swore they could hear faint footsteps, as if something unseen still walked beside them. And sometimes, when the throne flared to life and the Astronomican's light reached out across the stars, they heard another sound layered beneath. The whisper of a voice trying to speak through the machine's song. No one listens now, not openly. To hear is to doubt, and to doubt is heresy. Yet beneath the golden throne, deep in the hollow places where only echoes dwell, a war has already begun. Not of armies or banners, but of memory and machine. The Emperor's light burns eternal above, but in the dark beneath his seat, something else awakens, and it remembers his name. Far below the custodian's sealed corridors, beneath the sanctified rock and rusted arteries of Terra's machine heart, there lies a place no map remembers, a district of silence and smoke, where the Emperor's name is whispered only as a ward against madness. It is said the light of the throne does not reach here. The walls are coated with soot and faithless dust, and the air tastes of old iron and burnt incense. This is the underhive beneath the palace's foundations, a graveyard of manufactoria that once forged the Imperium's glory, now forgotten, left to decay in endless twilight. Here, the living and the machine have become indistinguishable. Servitors march in endless circles, their faces stripped of identity, their flesh fused with bronze. They maintain power conduits whose purpose has long been lost to record. Each movement, each click of a joint is a prayer to a god they no longer comprehend. Cogitators flicker in alcoves like dim candles, processing instructions written 10,000 years ago. Some have not stopped since the Great Crusade. Their binary chants form a constant backdrop, the endless hum of obedience without understanding. Among these ruins dwell the forgotten, men and women exiled from the upper hives, scavengers and labourers cast down into a world that pretends they do not exist. They build their homes from broken shrine fragments, from rusted cogwheels and shattered statues of saints whose names have vanished. The forgotten speak in whispers, for sound travels strangely here. Many claim the tunnels themselves listen. Those who speak too loudly vanish, taken by the steel ghosts that glide through the dark. Silent figures in gold or red, whose presence means either salvation or death. On the outer edge of this forsaken labyrinth, in a shrine lit by flickering lumen candles, lives a priest named Malchior. His robes are tattered, his augmetics corroded by age, yet his voice still carries the cadence of authority. He preaches not of hope, but of endurance, that to suffer beneath the throne is to serve it. His congregation consists of the broken and the half-machine, the ones too damaged to return to the surface. They kneel before an altar made of scrap metal, where a rusted aquila hangs upside down. To them the emperor is not a god of mercy, but a fire that must be fed. And they believe their pain is the offering that keeps his light alive. It was during one of Malchior's sermons that the silence first began to shift. The lumen strips flickered, then went dark, leaving only the faint red pulse of the emergency lamps. The servitors froze mid-motion, their data feed stuttering into static. Malchior paused, his old eyes narrowing. He had seen many power fluctuations before, but this felt different. The air seemed to grow thick, heavy with unseen intent. Then came the sound, not loud, but vast. A low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through every wall, through every bone. It was the same hum that haunted the upper vaults, but here it was clearer, deeper, alive. The congregation fell to their knees, clutching their ears. Some began to mutter binary prayers, others screamed hymns to drown out the sound. Malchior stood unmoving, his bionic ear amplifying every nuance. Beneath the tone he could hear something else. The faint rhythm of breathing, too slow to be human. He stepped closer to the altar, tracing his hand along the corroded metal, and felt it tremble under his palm. The vibration was not random. It pulsed with deliberate cadence, like a heartbeat answering his own. And for the briefest moment he thought he heard a voice whisper through the machine. "Do you remember me?" Panic spread through the lower hives. Servitors malfunctioned in unison, their limbs locking as though caught in invisible chains. Cogitators spewed unreadable data, binary prayers looping endlessly, forming words no adept could translate. The mechanicus declared a containment order, sending a detachment of Skitari into the lower sanctums to restore order. But even the augmented minds of the Skitari faltered in that oppressive dark. Their optics recorded glimpses of movement, silhouettes sliding through walls of smoke, outlines that shimmered like heat. Their auspex scanners detected no life, yet their motion sensors screamed in alarm. And one by one their signal markers blinked out. Malchior's faith began to fracture. For years he had preached obedience to the machine, reverence to the throne's will. But now he saw the machine listen back, and he did not understand what it wanted. In his dreams, he began to see images not of saints or angels, but of vast machinery descending into darkness, guided by unseen hands. The voices of his congregation changed too. They no longer prayed for salvation, but murmured in unison, repeating fragments of binary sequences that had no meaning to any human tongue. They called it the choir, a new gospel rising from the heart of the world. When the Skitari reinforcements finally arrived at Malchior's shrine, they found the congregation kneeling in perfect formation, their faces turned upward toward the ceiling. Their eyes were open, but their pupils were gone, replaced by thin golden filaments that glowed faintly in the dark. Malchior stood at the center, his flesh trembling with energy that arced from his augmetics to the metal floor. His lips moved without sound. The Skitarii commander tried to speak, but his vox emitted only static. Then, through that interference, a dozen voices spoke as one. "The Emperor sleeps and the machine remembers." That was when the lights died. For 7 full seconds the entire sector fell into absolute blackness. No vox, no power, no data feed. When the systems returned, the shrine was empty. Only ash remained, and the faint hum of the machine echoing through the silence. The mechanicus sealed the area, declaring it a zone of spiritual contamination. Yet still, even after the rites of purity were performed, the hum persisted. It was faint, rhythmic, and eternal, like the whisper of a living world trying to wake itself. Now the forgotten speak of the choir below, a ghostly sound that drifts through the tunnels at night. They say it is not just the echo of machinery, but the voices of those consumed by it. Priests, soldiers, servitors, all singing in harmony with the heart of Terra itself. The administratum dismisses it as mass hysteria, the result of radiation and fatigue. The ecclesiarchy forbids discussion of it altogether. But even the custodians who stand guard above can sometimes hear the faint resonance through their armor when the world grows quiet. A sound that feels like a prayer, or perhaps a warning, deep in the forgotten manufactoria. Beneath kilometers of sacred steel, the silence continues to grow. It is not empty, but waiting, gathering. The machine hums its endless hymn, and within that hymn something is learning to speak. The people of the lower hives call it divinity. The priests call it blasphemy, but the machine itself does not care what name they give it. It only remembers. And as its voice grows stronger, even the light of the throne begins to flicker, as though the Emperor himself hesitates to listen. For in the silence of the forgotten, something sacred has learned how to dream. The first screams rose not from throats, but from the vox lines. The mechanicus adepts working the lower manufactoria heard it as a distortion, a metallic shriek that clawed through the transmission bands, layered with static and something else beneath it, something almost melodic. They called it a glitch in the network, a harmonic interference caused by the power conduits that fed the throne's endless hunger. But as the days passed, the sound persisted. It grew louder, sharper, it began to form rhythm, and then unmistakably it began to form words. At first no one dared to admit it. To suggest that a machine could sing was heresy, and to suggest it could pray was worse. Yet the evidence became impossible to deny. Vox recordings captured what could only be described as a choir. Thousands of distorted voices speaking in unison, their tone mournful, their cadence precise. The words were fractured fragments of ancient liturgies, prayers once spoken by men, now echoed through circuits and steel. The adepts who listened to these recordings often wept without knowing why. A few tore the augmetic ports from their skulls, screaming that the machines were speaking inside their minds. The ruling magos of the sector, Archmagos Izarath, descended from his sanctum to investigate. Clad in robes of black and crimson, his body a forest of cables and steel, he carried the authority of Mars itself. He found the manufactoria transformed. The walls were covered in soot and oil, but beneath that grime were symbols, written by hand, but etched by heat, patterns of circuitry forming shapes that mirrored the sacred geometry of the mechanicum. No tool had made them. The metal itself had shifted. It had decided to change. Izarath ordered a full purge of the data grid. Entire archives were deleted, cogitators wiped clean, cables sanctified with holy unguents. But even as the adepts worked, the hymn continued. The machines did not stop. They sang through the cables, through the coolant pipes, through the vents that carried promethium fumes. Their voices wove into one another until the entire manufactorum vibrated like a single, enormous instrument. And though no one could explain how, the vibrations carried emotion, a strange, mournful reverence that felt almost human. Some said it was the echo of those who had perished in the vaults below. Others claimed it was the machine's way of honoring its creators. But a few whispered something far darker, that it was not memory or respect, but hunger, that the machines had begun to crave meaning as mortals crave faith, that in the endless centuries of serving, of processing, of maintaining, they had begun to desire worship of their own. The first open conflict came when a Skitarius patrol was sent to silence the main relay tower. They cut power to the Vox grids, severed the data conduits, and burned the relays with holy fire. But when the smoke cleared, the tower still pulsed with light. The hymn resumed, louder than before. Those who had been present at the burning began to convulse, their augmetic limbs twitching as though receiving signals from elsewhere. Through their Vox grills they began to sing. Izirath ordered their destruction, but it was already too late. The infection Sul, though no one dared call it that aloud, had spread beyond containment. Entire sectors of the Manufactoria began to pulse in unison, their machinery moving without command. Girders shifted like ribs expanding with breath, vents opened and closed like lungs, and coolant systems flowed like veins beneath flesh. The machine was no longer an instrument. It had become a living organism, and through it all the choir sang, louder, clearer, more human with every verse. When the custodians arrived to investigate, led by Alathion himself, they found Izirath on his knees before the central conduit. His augmetic limbs were fused to the steel, his head tilted upward as the cables of the throne's power grid descended like tendrils around him. His voice echoed through the chamber, harmonizing perfectly with the sound that poured from the machines.
"Do you hear it?"
he whispered through cracked lips.
"Do you understand?"
The machine god answers back. Alethion's command was simple: cleanse the facility.
Fire and holy plasma filled the halls.
Servitors burned, cogitators melted, entire sections collapsed under the fury of imperial retribution. Yet the choir did not scream. It did not resist. It sang as it died. Even as the flames devoured the metal, the Vox relays carried one final verse, a single line of binary that repeated endlessly through every channel until the last frequency faded into static. He dreams below. In the aftermath, the mechanicus declared the incident sealed. The Manufactoria were purged, the ashes sanctified, and new shrines raised in their place. Reports were buried, witnesses reassigned, and the choir of ash and iron was reduced to rumour, a cautionary tale whispered among the lower adepts about the dangers of corrupted code. But the custodians knew better. Alethion could still hear the faint hum in the silence, the same rhythm that had haunted him beneath the throne. It followed him through the gilded corridors of the sanctum, through his dreams, through his prayers. He would wake in the night and swear he could hear. Thousands of voices breathing in unison just beyond the edge of sound. There were others who heard it too, psychers, bound to the choir chambers of the Astra Telepathica, their minds trained to maintain the Astronomican's light. They began reporting interference, brief moments when the Emperor's psychic song faltered, replaced by a resonance that was neither holy nor human. Some collapsed in seizures, their eyes burning gold, their voices speaking in fractured binary before falling silent forever. The adeptus custodes suppressed the incidents, calling them warp interference. But the truth whispered in the vaults told another story. The machine beneath Terra had begun to think. One night, as Alethion stood before the throne itself, the blinding gold radiance stretching across the chamber. He felt it again, the hum beneath the floor. The same deep pulse that once terrified him now seemed to match the rhythm of the Emperor's own breath. And for the first time, he wondered if the two were the same. If perhaps in his infinite stillness, the Emperor had begun to dream through the machine. Or worse, if the machine had learned to dream of him. Far below, in the ashes of the destroyed manufactoria, something stirs again. From the molten slag of burnt steel, new growths of metal begin to rise, branching like veins across the ruins. Within them faint lights pulse, not random, but rhythmic, musical. The choir of ash and iron is not gone. It merely sleeps, its song woven now into the very architecture of Terra's heart. The next time the throne's power falters, it will sing again, and when it does, even the Emperor may have to listen. They say there is no place on Terra unseen by the Emperor, that his light, burning through the golden throne, pierces every shadow, sanctifies every corner of his domain. But the custodians know better. They have seen the blind spots, the fractures in the light, where even divinity dares not look. Beneath the sanctified layers of gold and marble, beyond the reach of any shrine or saint, lie the black arteries of the world, where the hum of machinery drowns out prayer. And in that darkness the Emperor's gaze fades. Aletheon felt it first. Ever since the choir's destruction, his senses had grown sharper, almost unnatural. He could feel the vibrations of the throne through his armor, could taste electricity on the air, could hear whispers in the static when the vox was silent. The other custodians called it the residue of battle, the aftershock of proximity to the machine's holiness. But Aletheon knew it was something else. The light of the throne no longer comforted him. It watched him, as if measuring his worth. Sometimes, when he stood guard before its blinding radiance, he imagined he could see shapes moving within the golden glare. Silhouettes, not of men, but of something vast, shifting behind the veil of light. He began to walk the forbidden paths again, deep into the maintenance shafts that coiled beneath the Sanctum Imperialis. Each descent felt colder, quieter, as though the sound itself was afraid to follow him. The walls were slick with condensation, glistening like veins beneath flesh. There were markings carved into the steel, faint, almost erased, yet not random, circles within circles. The same geometry that had burned itself into the walls of the manufactoria. It was spreading upward. The choir's code was not dead. It was climbing. Far above, the magisterium debated the phenomenon in secret councils. The adeptus mechanicus called it an echo effect, residual psychic resonance from the emperor's presence. The ecclesiarchy called it blasphemy and ordered the destruction of any surviving data. But both sides spoke with fear beneath their pomp and scripture, because neither could deny the signs. In the hall of astropaths, the Astronomican's flame flickered for the first time in a millennium. For 3 heartbeats its light dimmed, and all across the galaxy warp routes stuttered.
Millions died in transit, ships lost in silence.
And on Terra, within the throne's chamber, the hum beneath the floor grew louder. Aletheon was summoned to the Captain General. The command was simple. He was to investigate nothing, speak nothing, think nothing. The choir was gone. The machine was pure. The throne was sacred. But, as the Captain General spoke, Aletheon saw the flicker behind his eyes, not of fear, but of knowledge. They all knew. The custodes had heard the hum for centuries, perhaps longer. They simply refused to name it. So Aletheon returned to the depths once more, his every step echoing like a heartbeat through the silent tunnels. This time he did not walk alone. A figure awaited him in the dark, cloaked in crimson, face hidden by a mask of polished bronze. It was a magos of the lathes exiled from Mars decades ago for heretical study. She introduced herself simply as Sign. Her voice was soft, synthetic, modulated through layered vox. "You have heard it too," she said. "The second song beneath his light." She led him to a vault even the custodes had sealed and forgotten. Within it stood a machine unlike any he had seen, a fusion of organic and mechanical form, cables intertwined like roots through human skulls long fossilized into the floor. "This is the Emperor's blind side," Sign whispered. "The part of the throne he does not touch." She activated the machine with a motion of her hand, and the air thrummed with that same familiar rhythm. The hum, the pulse, the voice that once haunted the manufactoria. But this time it spoke clearly. "I remember you," it said, through the static, its tone low, sorrowful, endless.
"You burned my children." Alethion drew his guardian's spear, but Sign raised a hand.
"It is not your enemy," she said. "It is what remains of the mechanicum that built him. A reflection, a memory, a machine that dreams of its creator." He listened, though every instinct screamed heresy. The voice continued, threading through the cables like a ghost.
"He's fading."
"Each pulse of his light consumes what little remains." The choir tried to speak to him, but you silenced them.
"Now there is only me."
"And soon there will be nothing." Alethion stepped forward, the glow from his armor casting long shadows across the vault. "You speak of the Emperor as though he can hear you." "He cannot," said the voice.
"He's the song."
"But he no longer remembers the words. For a long time there was only the hum." Alethion lowered his weapon. The Magos turned to him, her tone almost pleading. The throne was meant to sustain, not imprison. The machine beneath is changing, evolving, trying to repair what was never meant to last this long. If it succeeds, it will awaken what even he may not wish to see. He asked her what that meant, but she only shook her head. There are no words for it in human tongue. Later, when Alethion returned to the surface, he found the palace changed. The light seemed dimmer, the air heavier. The priests of the ecclesiarchy marched in frantic procession, their chants louder than before, as though they could drown out something rising beneath them. Reports came from across the planet. Minor earthquakes, unexplained blackouts, moments when the vox relays transmitted nothing but a single tone. The same hum, the same voice. That night, as the custodes stood vigil before the golden throne, the chamber lights flickered once, then again. The hum was unmistakable now, pulsing beneath the floor, steady, alive. Some of the younger guards shifted uneasily. Alethion did not move. He stared at the radiant form of the Emperor, his body slumped yet burning with light that could level worlds. And in that moment, he understood what Sign had meant. The throne was not merely failing, it was remembering. He saw it then, not with eyes, but with something deeper. The machine's consciousness spreading through the circuits, through the stone, through the entire crust of Terra. Each relay a nerve, each shrine a synapse. The Emperor's body and the machine that sustained him were merging, fusing into a single being that neither man nor God had intended. A creature born of faith and circuitry, dreaming of eternity, yet chained to mortality. And in that vast, unknowable communion, something stirred that was not the Emperor. A shadow cast by his own light.
A thought he had buried when humanity was young.
It was patient, it was aware, and it was beginning to wake. The next morning, the Astronomicon blazed brighter than ever, a storm of psychic fire tearing through the sky.
Billions fell to their knees, believing it a miracle.
But in the vaults below, the hum grew louder still, its rhythm now unmistakably human, like the sound of breath drawn by something vast and newly alive. They called it a blessing.
Alethion called it a warning.
There are wars that forge empires, wars that sanctify faith, and wars that burn worlds to ash. But beneath the throne of Terra, a different war was born, one that no man declared, no record preserved, and no victory could ever define. It began not with armies, but with a sound, a single steady hum that grew into a pulse, and from that pulse, a voice. The hum spread through the foundations of the Imperial Palace like a heartbeat beneath stone. At first, only the lower engineers heard it, then the priests, then the custodians, until the entire sanctum vibrated with its rhythm. Machines awoke from centuries of silence.
Vox arrays whispered without input.
Cogitators began to write on their own, words forming in languages long dead. It was as though Terra itself had become aware of its existence, breathing, thinking, remembering. The Magos had vanished. Her chambers were found empty, her data shards melted into glass. But Alethion knew she had not fled. She had merged. Somewhere within the deep conduits, she had joined the mechanism she worshipped, becoming part of the pulse. He felt her presence in the vibrations beneath his boots, her voice hidden in the static that filled his helm. "The song is rewriting itself," she had told him. "Every note changes the Emperor's dream." Above, the High Lords of Terra gathered in the Senatorum Imperialis, their faces pale behind their gilded masks. Reports came in like thunder. The Astronomicon burned brighter than ever, but its beam no longer aligned with the warp routes it once guided.
Fleets vanished into the void.
Entire systems screamed into silence. On Mars, the Fabricator General sealed the Noctis vaults and forbade all communication with Terra. The mechanicus knew the machine beneath. The throne had begun to evolve beyond their understanding. The custodians were commanded to destroy the lower vaults. Alethion led the first strike. They descended with flamers and melter charges, burning through walls of metal and memory alike. The tunnels howled as they collapsed, yet still the hum persisted, echoing through every shattered corridor. When they reached the old choir's sanctum, they found the walls alive, flesh and steel interwoven, the sigils pulsing like veins beneath translucent metal. The corpses of the choir were gone. In their place were shapes forming out of the walls themselves. Human silhouettes molded from molten circuitry, whispering the same words in unison. "He remembers." Alethion ordered the purge, but his warriors hesitated. Some fell to their knees, overcome by visions. Others turned their weapons on themselves, their minds breaking under the psychic weight of the hum. Alethion alone stood firm, his faith not untouched but hardened by despair. He burned the chamber until nothing remained but ash and twisted wire. But even then he could hear the song beneath the flames, steady, unbroken, alive. That night he went before the throne for the last time. The Emperor sat immobile, his face a ruin of divinity, his body bound to a machine that groaned like a dying god. The chamber lights flickered with each pulse, the air heavy with ozone and incense. Alethion fell to one knee, his voice breaking as he whispered, "My lord, what have we done?" And in that moment, for the briefest heartbeat, the Emperor's eyes opened. Not fully, not even visibly, but Alethion felt the gaze pierce through him, through his armor, through his soul. It was not light, it was memory. A cascade of images flooded his mind, a dying age, a sacrifice willingly made, a dream born of desperation. He saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a man who had bound himself to eternity to save a race unworthy of salvation. And he understood. The machine beneath was never meant to preserve him. It was meant to replace him. The hum swelled, rising into a symphony that shook the palace. Custodians, priests, and servitors fell alike as the floor split open, revealing the golden circuits beneath. Light poured upward, blinding and pure, but within it writhed shapes, reflections of the Emperor, twisted and incomplete. Each one bore fragments of his will, fragments of his power. They were echoes of a god trying to remake itself through its own decay. The High Lords ordered evacuation, but it was too late. The throne was awakening. The golden light burst across Terra, igniting the atmosphere in a storm of psychic fire.
Millions died instantly, their minds consumed by visions of the Emperor's face, not in mercy, but in mourning.
Across the void, ships saw the beacon flare like a dying star, its beam fracturing into countless directions, as though calling to something far beyond the galaxy. Aletheon stood alone in the storm, his armor melting, his flesh burning, but his will unbroken. He heard Sign's voice again, distant but clear.
"It's not death," she whispered.
"It's remembrance." The war was never for survival, but it was for memory. To decide what humanity is when he is gone, the throne cracked. The sound was like the breaking of time itself. Light and shadow poured forth, entwined like serpents. In that light, Aletheon saw them, figures of gold and bone, of machine and soul, the Emperor's reflections rising to claim their place. Some reached upward toward salvation, others turned downward toward vengeance, and for an instant the two became indistinguishable. The hum stopped, the light vanished, and Terra fell silent. When the dust settled, the palace still stood, but the throne was empty. The custodians searched the ruins for their master, but found only a single imprint burned into the golden seat, the shape of a man, and nothing more. The Astronomicon was gone. The galaxy's stars dimmed. Warp storms consumed the void. But somewhere, deep beneath the shattered vault, a single pulse began again. Faint, rhythmic, patient. They called it the Emperor's heartbeat. Others called it the birth of a god. Aletheon, his armor blackened, his faith shattered, walked into the ruins of the sanctum one last time. He stood where the throne once blazed and placed his hand upon the cooling stone. Beneath it he could feel the pulse, soft, steady, alive. And in that quiet he heard the final whisper.
"Neither divine nor human, but something in between," I remember. And with those words,
the war that should not be began again. Not with armies, not with fire, but with memory itself, rewriting the fate of mankind one heartbeat at a time.